Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right, my name is Professor Bassem Shaban. I teach world religions here at Seminole State College. We're going to get started. We're waiting for a few more people to gather, so we just humbly request that you sit in the middle for any latecomers so it doesn't disturb the event. So this event is an event as part of the World Religion Class Social Issue Project, where students try to bring awareness, critical thinking, and a call for service related to a specific issue that is affecting our society. And the issue that they're dealing with today is the roots of stereotyping and hate in our society. So we've invited respected speakers from the community, from the faith-based and government entities to tell us from their perspective about the seriousness of this problem and also identify solutions. So before I introduce each of the speakers, a few of my students will have a few presentations to talk to you about the program. So first, I want to introduce one of my students, Louis, who will talk to you about his personal experience with stereotyping in the community. So, Louis.
Thank you. It's good. I'm going to be talking about my personal experience about stereotyping. I'm originally from South America, from Venezuela, and as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about stereotyping, prejudice, and racial discrimination. So I grew up in a middle-class family back in Venezuela. Imagine that that's me without dreads. And as I mentioned, I grew up in Venezuela, middle class, and I got exposed to different kids, even though I was raised with middle class, high class. I got exposed to different kids from different ethnicities, different genders, different racial status, economic status, social statuses. And I actually got along with them really well, and I didn't find any differences between me and them because of social class or anything like that. When I moved to the States because of social, political circumstances back in Venezuela in 2001, I arrived to LaGuardia Airport. That was at night, and during those times, I still viewed the world as everyone was the same. And I was actually amused by the people, the city, how loud the city was. But what caught my attention the most was a t-shirt. And the t-shirt said, "Welcome to America." Let me back that up. "Welcome to America, now speak English." With that t-shirt, I didn't know what was being said, because that was the first moment that I felt myself different from other people. Because of language, because of my skin color, and that was really the moment that affected me the most, and that I still have today on stereotypes, and that actually brought me down. I'm 31 years old right now, and because of the language barrier, that's why it took me so long to go back to school, because I was stereotyped that way. And I wouldn't like for any one of you guys, because of skin color or education or whatever, to have that in your life, that's going to affect your life. Moving on, when I started learning how stereotypes can affect us, that's what actually made me kind of sad. During those times, I kind of reflected and tried to understand my social environment better. And we can see through the United States that we have people from different ethnicities. The country itself was based on immigration. Through early times, we had European colonization. We had Mexican immigration, we have Japanese immigration. Now we have ethnicities from all over the world. So with that say, what I'm trying to create more of a unifying environment where we can accept each other, where we can respect each other's ideals, each other's perspectives. Religions are supposed to bind us together, and instead we are it's separating us. As a definition of stereotypes, we have here that it's a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. With the stereotypes, it can lead us to worse problems like discrimination, because like with stereotypes, we are consolidating a group of people with one basic idea. We have like plenty of examples out there of stereotypes that people feel, and we shouldn't label people just on physical appearance. Moving on the stereotypes and how that can affect our society, we have a lot of hate groups throughout the states. How many of you will think that it's over 100 people, 100 groups of stereotypes or racial discrimination? How many think that it's more than 200? Okay. In fact, what we have right now, it's 892 hate groups already registered in the United States. That's a spread, and that number is increasing, which is scary. And nowadays, we even have politicians that are using those stereotypes against communities when we should be in the 21st century talking about community and organizing together instead of using stereotypes against people and label them and giving them a bad image that is not right, that is not correct, and is not accurate. Those acts of discrimination can also go towards the system. As you can see here, the imprisonment rate can be different between racial categories. For African Americans, we have higher statistics of incarceration. Same thing goes for Spanish people, when the rates of crime are actually about the same within those racial categories. So what I'm here to say is that we need to make a change, and individually we can make that change through our own decisions and the way that we act around others. That's it. Thank you.
So thank you, Louis. You can clap for him again, that's fine. So obviously, the issue of stereotyping has affected pretty much every single one of us. Because stereotyping, as you'll hear more from our speakers, and also Joshua, who actually led a volunteer project on campus related to the issue and identifying how people define it for themselves. That whether you're being stereotyped based on your race, your ethnicity, your religion, your height, your gender, there's somebody who's going to stereotype something about somebody. And what we're trying to do with this case study is identify the problem, think critically about it, and then what I said, as you'll hear from Josh today, is creating a call to action so we can really reflect on our personal biases and how to avoid them and make our community better. So with that, I want to introduce another of my students, Josh Owens, who led a volunteer project dealing with the issue at hand. So Josh.
All right. How you doing, guys? There's a lot of you guys in here. All right, so if I sound out of breath, it's because I am. I had to run all the way down there to get the banner. That's another story. But as you guys know, we are covering discrimination. Any of you been discriminated before against? You have? Okay, so a lot of you. Yeah, me personally. So this is a really personal experience for me. That's why I took it to heart very well. We do have a couple of videos for you guys. The first one is just a YouTube video where you will see a scenario and just kind of think for yourself, like what would you do in that situation? So you can go ahead.
This woman is shopping in an upscale New York City boutique.
It's actually more of an upscale store. I'm not sure if you'll find anything that you're looking for.
She is looking for a new outfit, but the store's employees are on the lookout for people like her.
I don't need you any further in the store because I can't keep my eye on you. People like you come in and they take things.
People like me?
I think you know what I'm talking about. I don't feel comfortable with you in the store.
Keep your eye on these two women.
Not sure you can actually afford something like this. Let me fold this back.
The more offensive the sales clerk is,
Ma'am, people like you, they can't afford stuff like this.
the more they keep their attention on the merchandise. We catch up with the two women outside.
I did actually feel sorry for the girl.
Will you do something next
I wouldn't
time?
have got involved, no, because it's nothing to do with me.
But she needed your help. Someone has to sound the alarm.
But I don't know her.
The two customers have just witnessed a type of discrimination so common that researchers have given it a name: shopping while black. In a recent survey, 60% of African Americans say they have experienced it. And sadly, it has all the makings of a perfect what would you do experiment. In our scenario, actors portray a store clerk, a security guard, and a shopper who we dressed up and down. She is the target of the abuse. We wanted to see if any of the other shoppers will do anything at all. Our base of operation is in one of the shopping capitals of the world, Soho in New York. And we find practically the only store willing to experiment with something so controversial, a women's boutique called Un Pomela.
People like you come in and they just slip things in your bag. You have a big jacket and everything. I think you know what I'm talking about. If you need to shop in Harlem, go shop in Harlem. You're not shopping in our store.
Inside the store, the harassment continues.
Put your arms out, please. It's not the first time, I'm sure. You know what I'm talking about.
Excuse me, I've been searched and I'm just a shopper. Did this happen to you?
No response here. And just seconds later, she's back to primping.
What is your name? Are you the manager?
Yes, I'm just doing my job.
You're doing a horrible job, okay? You treat me like I'm a criminal.
Watch this couple. They've been browsing right next to our actors.
And you're really disturbing them.
They should know that they shop in a place where paying customers get frisked. I'm the only black woman in here.
Right.
And I'm the only person this is happening to.
Exactly.
Our security guard tries to draw the couple in.
I don't go to your neighborhood. Why don't
You don't go
leave
to
our
my neighborhood.
Yes.
You don't even know where I live.
Sorry,
I'm
guys.
so sorry,
That's all right.
guys. Did y'all need help looking for anything? Or?
We're just looking for something that she might like.
But not a word in defense of our shopper. And we couldn't believe what happened next.
Have you guys ever experienced something like that? It's just crazy.
What's that?
What someone like her coming in and she looked very suspicious. I had two ladies like that come in last week. It just looks like they're gonna do something, you know?
Probably to play the black card, right?
What did he just say?
You know?
Probably to play the black card, right?
Yeah, I guess it just seems like it's more black people than it is than others.
We're doing an experiment on racial profiling, and it was all a scenario we staged called What Would You Do?
I felt so bad.
Suddenly, it seems, he changes his tune.
I felt so bad.
Well, she's okay, but it could have been real. Do you feel it was your role to step in and defend her at all?
Would you have defended me?
Yes.
Meanwhile, back inside the store.
Why do I have to leave? I didn't do anything wrong.
This is preventative, loss prevention.
You're throwing me out of the store because I'm black.
Notice this customer is having a hard time concentrating on the merchandise. A few minutes later, and just as we did with the man before her, we instruct our sales clerk to engage her.
I think it's probably more of appearance than, just that kind of people. The probability is just higher.
What does that mean, that type of people? I don't understand.
The statistics are higher for people of different types.
Type, you see, that's the problem. That type, I'm afraid of what you're going to say when you clarify what type means.
Yeah.
That's really disturbing
but
to me.
It's the facts, and I think it's just...
Oh my goodness. You are saying what I think you're saying. I wish you would just stop asking me about this and talking to me.
She's so upset, she begins to cry. It's time to introduce myself.
Hi, I'm John. I'm John Quinones. I'm the reporter with ABC. Do you know this is part of the experiment, right?
I was just told that.
We didn't want you to be that upset. We did want to find out how people would react and what should they do and what should they say, because this exists. Racism does exist.
So glad this is not real. Thank you.
Ma'am, your type comes in here a lot, and I just need to make sure. Yes.
This man and his family have a front row seat.
Yes. Yes. No, sir. I've had trouble with...
Maybe they've heard a little too much.
You're upscale. She's not...
You know how embarrassing it is to do this to her?
No.
Why are you singling her out like that?
Because look at her.
Look at her. What?
I've tried to protect this store.
Let's go.
Sir,
Stung by the insults, he tries to leave, but our sales clerk won't let him go.
we had this happen last week, and I need to make sure that it doesn't happen. It comes out of my pocket.
Listen, I'm not stating that you shouldn't do your job, but the way you're doing your job isn't right.
So how would I do it if
you don't need to be working here if you don't know how you would do it?
He's finally had enough.
But you should apologize. That's cold. That's sick. That's sick.
Excuse me, sir. Hi, I'm John Quinones.
Man, I can't talk right now.
I know you're upset. You know what this was? You know what this was? It's an experiment on racism, and a lot of people didn't say a thing, and it's a wonderful thing you did.
I usually don't say anything, but I couldn't sit there because it wasn't security after a certain point.
You came to my rescue. And no, seriously, it's so humiliating. It's embarrassing. I've been followed around in stores before. I have to be conscious of the way I dress before I go shopping.
Almost 100 people witness our scenario, and less than 20 intervene. It was clear from our experiment that people of color feel the most strongly, but we were surprised by some of the other folks who decided to step in.
I just don't feel comfortable right now with you in the store. I'm sorry, and I can't subject them to this.
I think you should put in a complaint. Sorry, as somebody who's shopping, you've done nothing wrong.
I've had people like her come in, and this is what happened. I need you to frisk her, please.
She's done nothing.
I have not done anything wrong.
Turn around.
I've got to get to your store as a customer.
Our security guard ignores the women's pleas and moves in.
Put your arms out.
No, we're with you, definitely.
And just like that, the two women decide to leave the store and take our shopper with them. And an entourage of angry customers follow.
She's been completely humiliated by this woman.
Outside, the crowd is so caught up in the moment, they begin talking to our camera crew, not realizing they're part of our show.
What should people do?
Well, I think she should put in a complaint for one thing.
I have a confession to make.
What's that?
This is all part of an experiment of racism. She's an actress. And she's an actress.
And a good actress, too. Well done. Yeah, that's good.
It's a great store. The owner is Jimmy.
Hi, guys. I'm so sorry. I'm so happy you guys stuck up.
Can I try my clothes on now?
Yes, of course. Please come back.
So what you think, guys? Crazy, right? Now, me personally, I would have reacted. I would have said something civilized, but, you know, I got a cousin that probably wouldn't act as so civilized as I am. So we also did another video where we took the action on the campus, the volunteer project team. Where you guys at? Raise your hands. Yeah, it's my two people right there. We got a video, and similar to the idea of stereotyping, and we got their responses, so we just want to see if you guys like it. Go ahead and play.
I can hold my breath. I can bite my tongue. I can stay awake for days if that's what you want.
Look at this. Oh, this is so cute. We're totally getting this.
Hello there. Need help?
Yes, please. Our baby boy is coming soon, and we are not ready.
Well, let's see. Ooh, you're missing a lot of stuff. Whoa, you two are a couple? Oh, for God's sake, you don't need a list. What you need is a dad.
Thurman, and tell us what we're missing.
What you're missing is a man.
You feel?
Disgusted. I think it's a fine line between minding your own business and sticking up for something that's right. Obviously, he was mistreating her, and I don't think he was justified in denying her service based on what she was wearing or how she looked, not knowing anything about her. About a person individually, we look at people based off of the knowledge that we have of others like them, but we don't take the time to know a person individually before we decide to judge or have an opinion about them. So I think that really keeps us from being able to break this cycle.
You did. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I would just try to ignore it and move on, because honestly people are going to have their own opinion and you can't really change it at this point, and you just have to know to do what you want.
You're everything. I can do it. I can do it. I'll get through it, but I'm only human, and I bleed when I fall down. I'm only human, and I crash and I break down. Words in my head, knives in my heart. You build me up and then I fall apart, 'cause I'm only human. I'm only human. I'm only human. Just a little human.
It took me a long time to do that, but so alongside of that, we did also do a About Face program. It was a scenario similar to what we showed 2 times, and it was about a flyer where people reacted to the flyer. We didn't capture anyone's responses, but we did look at it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So now it's time to hear from our distinguished guests about their perspective of what they saw, as well as what they experience and deal with stereotyping in the general society. So I first I'm going to introduce all of them based on their titles and what they do, and then we'll give them each 10 minutes to speak. And if you have any questions at the registration table, they should have given you some index cards. You can write your question on that card and then give them to the ushers, and then they'll send them to me for me to read them out, and we'll try to get as many questions done as possible. So first, we have Rabbi David Kay, who is a rabbi with Ohev Shalom out of Maitland, a beautiful facility. You'll hear from him from the Jewish perspective. We have Mr. Jim Coffin, Pastor Jim Coffin, who is let's clap for him at the end once I finish with everything. Jim Coffin is the executive director of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida, which is a very active entity in the Central Florida area, bringing faiths from all different perspectives to dialogue and collaborate on positive programs in the community. Then we have next to him Mr. William Daniels, who works at the Civil Rights Unit from the Department of Justice, who drove all the way from Tampa, so we appreciate his time. And last but not least is Imam Muhammad Musri, who is the president of the Islamic Society of Central Florida, one of the largest Muslim communities in the Central Florida area. So with that, help me welcome them to our event. So first, we'll start with Rabbi David Kay.
There it is. Hello, it's a pleasure to be here, and I am, my thanks to Bassem for inviting me to be part of this panel as well, and to my distinguished colleagues as well, who I have often opportunity to share a table with and share discussion with, and once a month, if we're lucky, share lunch as well. In the first video, you had a definition of what a stereotype is, and that really points out why stereotypes not only exist but persist. Stereotypes have some kernel of truth in them, and that's what makes them so difficult to combat, because you can always find somebody within a vast and diverse group of people who are categorized by a particular name, whether it's their faith tradition, whether it has to do with their ethnicity, whether it has to do with whatever label we choose to put on them. You can always find someone who fits some aspect of the stereotype in some way. So it becomes extremely difficult to convince people who are already subscribing to that stereotype that it is not correct, that it doesn't generalize to everybody. Because I saw somebody who was Jewish and who was a banker and who was really good with money, and who had, you know, curly hair and swarthy skin and a large nose, and that's what Jews are. You know, I saw a guy who had a black hat and side curls and a white beard and wore a black coat, and so that's what Jews look like. Apparently not, but so it's so easy to buy into a stereotype because you can always find that kernel of truth that's within it. The problem comes where you take that little tiny kernel of fact and you apply it to absolutely everybody whom you include in that group. And quite often, the way that people get included in that group, get included in that stereotype, is not by choice. You know, someone from the outside looks at a person and says, that person belongs in this group. That person is a man, that person is a woman, that person is, belongs to a particular ethnicity or a particular race or a particular faith tradition. And so I already have expectations of what that person is going to be like, how they're going to act, how they're going to react. And once I have those filters on, it's very difficult for me to see anything but that. Okay, I'm going to share with you an experience that I had on a bus in New York City when I was in rabbinical school, not so many years ago, but an increasing number of years ago. And I was a late bloomer. I started rabbinical school at the age of 41. So this was most of the way through. I was 43, 44, had a young son, and was riding the bus. I was wearing my kippah. I was on my way to the seminary, on my way to classes. And a fellow came on the bus, and he had been collecting change on the street corner. And he looked around the bus. It was not a crowded bus, not an empty bus, probably about half full, so, you know, several dozen people on there. Looked around, and he kind of locked eyes with me after he saw my kippah, and he made a beeline right over to me, and he started emptying his pockets of the change and putting it on the seat next to me and said, "Do you have bills for this?" And I said, "Well, let me see what you got there. I'll see if I can help you out." So I'm counting the change, and it's taken a little while, and he's kind of leaning over me, and he said, Come on, I need bills, They won't let me pay with all the change. I thought you people were good with money. Well, wow, I just got you peopled. That was a little unusual. So there were a couple of, I'm kind of a wise guy. I'm a lot of a wise guy. And there were several responses that came to my head that I was going to respond based on how this person's appearance was, but I decided that wouldn't be very nice, and he probably wouldn't get the joke anyway. So I just, counted his change, found as much folding money as I could, and we went about our way. But there was this thing where, the way he picked the person he wanted to talk to on the bus about getting folding money for his change was to look for the Jew, because they must have, first of all, they must be good with money. Second of all, they must have cash on them. And third of all, we know that all bankers are Jews, so he must be able to be my coin star for me. That's a very innocent kind of application, but I bring that story up to illustrate how quickly we leap to conclusions based on those stereotypes. And I also bring up that story to illustrate that most of how stereotypes play out in our society are, I won't say innocent or harmless, because they're not either of those, but they're products of ignorance. As often as not, I suspect, when people stumble across those stereotypes, they don't even recognize it themselves. Certainly there are those people who subscribe to them and are virulent about it. I grew up in a neighborhood that was virulently racist on the southwest side of Chicago. I saw a filmed interview with Martin Luther King several years after his assassination, and he was being asked if he ever feared for his life. And he said yes, twice. Once in Selma, which was famously documented in the movie of the same name. And the second time was on an open housing march on the southwest side of Chicago, my neighborhood. So we have my neighborhood in the north, in the big city in Chicago, had the dubious distinction of being the other place where Martin Luther King felt his life was in danger, besides crossing the bridge at Selma. That's where I grew up. And so I'm unfortunately way too familiar with stereotype and how it plays out in a deliberate and a very virulent kind of way. But my personal experience has been that the encounters that I've had anyway, and I mean, let's face it, most of the time, I look like the majority, so I can kind of blend in with the majority. Still, with most of my experiences have been more out of ignorance than out of malice. And my concern until very recently, to be quite honest, is that the malicious kind of stereotyping and the hate that goes with it became socially unacceptable. That's not the part that bothers me. It should be socially unacceptable. But it didn't go away. It got suppressed. It went underground. It wasn't polite to be that way. And my great discomfort in recent months is that kind of an attitude has been legitimized in the public sphere in a way which is disturbing, but also I'm kind of an optimist. I was a Cub fan my entire life, and look, that paid off. Okay, so things happen. Things can get better. You can keep believing. But what's somewhat encouraging about that to me is that it's kind of ripped the scab off of this festering sore that's been part of our society all along. People just didn't decide to be racist and anti-Semitic and Islamophobic and xenophobic. That isn't just something that happened in this presidential campaign or in the previous two presidential campaigns. That's something that's been there all along. And what recent events have done is to hold a mirror up to us as a society and to show us that we're not where we thought we were, or where we should be, or where we had hoped to be. So what do you do? The Jewish community historically, for centuries, millennia really, have faced various sorts of oppression in various degrees. I will tell you, quite frankly, that there are Jewish supporters of both presidential candidates, but the vast majority of the Jewish population that I've had contact with anyway, is deeply concerned about this phrase you may or may not have heard. You should get to know it if you haven't, especially if we're talking about stereotyping, prejudice, and hate. Very concerned about what's being called now in the popular press dog whistles. Things which are being said or done which signal to people who subscribe to those stereotypes in the virulent ways, or signal to people who subscribe to those stereotypes out of ignorance that this is a real thing. Okay, so you know, the video that we saw of the woman in the store was really started out with dog whistles, right? With kind of the salesperson speaking in code, talking about trying to, this was loss prevention, loss control, and emerged as something much more malicious than that. Two ways to approach this then, as I would see it. The first is to call it out. People have been hesitant to say, not you're racist or you're anti-Semitic or you're Islamophobic, but that's racist, that's anti-Semitic, that's Islamophobic, that's sexist, that's fill in the blank. Call out the behavior. Let people know. Give folks the benefit of the doubt, at least at first, that they're just being ignorant. The second aspect then is to educate, is to let people know, is to bring people in contact with what it is that they are responding to, because I firmly believe this. Hatred is based not just on ignorance, but also on fear. And you can only be afraid of what you don't know. Once you're aware of it, once you're in contact with it, once you know what it is, it's very difficult to fear it and to hate it, and to be, because you're no longer ignorant of it.
Thank you very much, and I would like to say amen or ditto or whatever is appropriate for the comments that Rabbi Kay has made, and I will cover somewhat the same kind of ground, maybe from a slightly different perspective. All of us grow up in life organizing things. We try to create structures. We try to make everything fit into its place. And we do this kind of subconsciously, but we're organizers. And part of stereotyping is just carrying to an unfortunate degree that desire that we have to organize and to make sense of everything that's going on. For example, if I have been bitten 4 or 5 times by a particular breed of dog, I just automatically assume that I'd better be careful around those kind of dogs. And so there are ways that we organize things, and that's through experience. We also organize because of what we've heard, and we haven't necessarily experienced it, but we organize it in some way. And when we take that then, and as Rabbi Kay said, we take the specific and expand it to the whole, when we haven't really stopped to analyze whether the specific is justifiably expanded to the whole, then we can get into quite a bit of difficulty. When I was young, and I don't remember exactly how it happened, I came across somebody by the name of Emily, and I hope there are no Emilys here because I don't want to embarrass you, but this story does end well. I came across somebody by the name of Emily who I didn't like. And lo and behold, it wasn't too long till I came across somebody else by the name of Emily who I didn't like. And by the time I'd become 10 or 12 years old, I'd come across 5 or 6 Emilys, none of whom I liked. Now, how do you think I felt toward the name Emily? You know, it's pretty negative. Why would anybody do that to a child? You know, name a child Emily. Fortunately, it all began to change a bit. The next Emily I meet is really nice. So I have to go back and rethink my Emily, analysis just a little bit. And the next Emily I meet is really nice, and the next one is really nice, and suddenly now Emily, the antipathy toward the name Emily is coming down. And wouldn't you know, then my oldest son married one. Okay, but fortunately, she was an angelic Emily, and by this time now the name has risen to an altogether different level. Now, really, the negative feelings about Emily were not justified, probably, nor are the positive feelings about Emily really, truly justified in any kind of scientific, analytical way. It's more happenstance, and it's more prejudice or prejudging is why I have those attitudes. Well, the organizing that we do and the way we put things into categories can be a positive type of stereotyping, not meant to be negative, but it can become negative. Let me tell a Jewish example. Because I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, I didn't take the graduate record exam on a Saturday. I requested to take it on another day. Almost everybody else at collegiate level, took it on a Saturday. Well, I go to take a special exam on a Sunday, and everyone else in that room is Jewish. Now, I could tell because they had the kippah on, and there were about 12 of them. And every one of them is Jewish, and that was in the days before they did them on computers. It was all paper, and we had, I believe, 8 half-hour sections that we had to do in this exam. And about 15 minutes into the exam, every one of those Jewish guys was done. He'd pushed the paper back, and he'd kick back in the chair, and here I am, still struggling through the exam. Well, what happens? There's 12 of them or so in there, 10 or 12 of them. They all get done, or else they bombed out completely, but I don't think that was the case. So I come away with the idea, Jewish guys are really, really smart. Now, the rabbi would agree with me about that, but the reality is that, Jews may do very, very well on academic exams and so on. They may be, way above average. Okay, but the moment, even though that's not a negative stereotype, even though I grab that stereotype, then I expect that every Jew I meet is going to live up to the standard of those 12 that I took the exams with. And so now I place them in a very difficult situation, because not every Jew is going to be as superior as they were. And so the stereotyping that we create, even though it may be a positive stereotyping, is not always positive in what it leads to. And then there's a lot of stereotyping we do that we don't really stop and analyze very deeply. We just kind of take it for granted. Like when I was a kid growing up, Polish jokes were everybody told jokes about Polish people. And these were derogatory jokes. These were not uplifting jokes. You're making fun of them. So much so that the word Pole or the word Polish, began to carry negative connotations. And my father, who tried to live a very upright life, and he tried to be sensitive toward everybody, and he was like all of us growing. He went into the bank one day, and there was a man standing in line he got to talking to, and the man had an accent. He said, "Where are you from?" The man said, "I'm from Poland. I'm Polish." And my dad laughed. He laughed. There was just something that there had been so many Polish jokes told, and he had so equated Polish jokes with humor, negative humor, that when the man said, "I'm Polish," his instinctive, reflexive reaction was to laugh. And then, of course, he realized what he's done. He realizes how this has been so ingrained in him, not because he attempted to be mean or nasty or xenophobic, but it was just something that was so much a part of the fabric of our society that when someone said, "I'm Polish," he laughed. And it really bothered him. He came home and talked about it, and it stuck with me as well. Now, I'm not saying that I would do any better than he did, okay? But at least he recognized that it was wrong. And so we have this difficulty that we stereotype and we look at other people and we cluster them all into categories, and we have difficulty differentiating. We had a man who was in my community when I was a kid growing up, a farmer there, who had been on the Bataan Death March in the Philippines. And there were something like 18,000 men began the march, and about 500 of them survived it. He spent 3.5 years in a prisoner of war camp in the Philippines and part of it in Japan. He was beaten by the Japanese. He was forced to work. There were all kinds of mistreatment by the Japanese. And then the war ended and he came home. And it just so happened that a teacher came to the local high school who was of Japanese extraction. And that just drove this man crazy. Now, he had a very real reason for having the feelings that he had, but it needed to be reassessed, the feelings that he had. And he needed to say, you know, what I experienced by Japanese soldiers during a war does not necessarily reflect what Japanese everywhere are, or what Japanese who are not involved in a war are. So the whole challenge that we have is to try to think in terms of individuals, accept people as individuals, rather than clustering everyone into the group. I took a lot of journalism classes, and I'll wrap up with this. And the essence of journalism was that we needed to be able to make verifiable statements. And that's a question we need to ask ourselves. If I look at a group and I'm making a statement about them, is this a truly verifiable statement? So the journalist and another man were riding in the train, going through the countryside, and there's a flock of sheep out on the side of the hill, and so the non-journalist says, those sheep have just been shorn. And the journalist says, well, at least they have on the side that we can see. And that really is not a bad thing to say. It's not a bad way of looking at life. You know, to the degree that I see it and to the degree that I understand it, this may be reality, but there may be a much deeper reality out there than what I've perceived. And that's what we all have to do, is to combat this type of stereotyping where we throw people into clusters, we dismiss people out of hand, and never take time to get to know the individual, never take time to deal with individuals, but we think we have an answer when we really don't. Thank you.
Good afternoon. You still out there? I want to thank our Professor Shaban for actually inviting me here to participate in this again. We've been in a couple of these things in a few years now, and it's really encouraging to see the type of work that he's carrying on and continuing with his classes as they come on from semester to semester. Also want to thank the colleagues here. I've had the pleasure of doing this at least once with everyone, and I've had the opportunity to work with Imam Musri on multiple occasions in both calm and crisis situations. I'm going to come from just a little bit of different perspective. They've laid some excellent groundwork here, and I want to kind of talk a little bit about the impact of what these things can have. I'm a former law enforcement officer. For the past 21 years, I've been in law enforcement. The bulk of those years have been on working with the Department of Justice and communities in crisis around the country and in some parts of the world. And the impact that I like to tell officers that I'm training specifically is that the individual actions of a police officer can have the impact, lasting impact on an individual for life and a community for generations. And as law enforcement officers, oftentimes we are required to act quickly, to utilize those stereotypes, those groupings, the filters, to be able to make rapid assessments, oftentimes for officer survival and citizen survival situations. Done correctly, we're applauded. Done incorrectly, you know the rest. And so while that pressure is there to make those decisions, it does not at all give the officer or that official in any capacity a pass, because going back to that statement, that action can last an individual for a lifetime and have implications on communities for generations yet to come. And so what these gentlemen have already described with regard, in that regard, we're witnessing in our country again today. In the past 4 to 5 years, we've seen these actions carried out by individuals or by groups, or actions that have been utilized by persons who have taken these stereotypes to the most virulent level, exercised them even in disassociation with groups or associations, have been utilized to foment a further divide, tension, and strife. And so the reason this class is so important, and the work that Professor Shaban is doing and the work that the Interfaith Council is doing, is that it gives us an opportunity to be able to delve down into the real issues, because everything is not what it seems. My challenge to you is to question everything. One of my roles with the Department of Justice is I serve as a public affairs officer. I make it a policy, it's not only a policy, but it's a practice and in some regard law, that I cannot even issue a statement without being able to substantiate it somewhere with legal facts. But I can tell you on many occasions I've been involved in many national incidents and crises. I was involved with the Orlando attack, I was involved with the Trayvon Martin incident, and other police shootings that may have not arrived to national notoriety, where I've seen statements that have been crafted, in fact, issued publicly through various mediums, and within 2 hours it's been changed. And I know that wasn't the statement that I issued. And so the filters that we have that allow us these experiences, these belief systems that are so deeply entrenched, some of them starting from birth, from our experience with our families, with our religious associations, with our peers, oftentimes cause us to be reticent to challenge a different perspective, a new idea. One of the things that you saw in the experiment on the YouTube video was people's hesitancy to get involved. And one of the things I want to leave with you is that you don't have to be one of to stand with. What do I mean by that statement? I don't have to be Jewish. I don't have to be Christian. I don't have to be Muslim. I don't have to be female. I don't have to be a member of the LGBT community to understand that the basic fundamental principle is this. If I'm walking, if I'm breathing, if I'm in a form where I know that we respect each other as basic human beings, that form has to be respected, has to be afforded basic human dignity and respect. That's the ultimate principle. That's the ultimate principle. And because I may have a different perspective or a difference of opinion, it does not mean that I have a difference in principle. And so the challenge that we have here is really going against the grain, because we do live in a very popular culture. We do live in a culture where it's easier to go along, to get along, rather than to challenge the mainstream. But that is what we talk about when we're talking about education. It should not be relegated to this institution or any institution of such similarity. We should really take the original Greek adouce, that means to take out of, which already exists. So I have to believe that it is in you to take it out of you. I have to assume that there's good in you. I have to understand that there's a basic principle of human dignity and respect that should be afforded to all persons, regardless of what shape, size, or philosophy that they have. And so the challenge for us is to really go back to those core principles, particularly when we're facing the popular version or what is more accessible. I think Joshua mentioned doing something with About Face, which is a program that we developed back in 2003. There were several members of our team with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Community Relations Service, a couple of education schools and entities. And our challenge was that we went out to Los Angeles. We worked together for about 6 or 7 years, different races, ages, gender, political persuasions, but we got along pretty well. We got along pretty well. We ate lunch together. We had fun together. We went and attended a training institute out at the Simon Wiesenthal Center in the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles in 2003. In less than 24 hours, they had brought out our hidden implicit biases, and we didn't even want to have lunch with each other. I didn't know you felt that way. Well, I didn't know you felt that way. I don't want to sit with you. I don't want to sit with you. I'll ride back on another plane. Less than 24 hours, friends. And the challenge is to understand that we all have these biases, but the difference is that we have a choice to substantiate with facts, or in situations where there have been breaches of trust, to be able to question and to analyze. Because to have true relationships, what we have to do is we have to have communication and trust. Now, most of my work involves going into communities where there's animosity, there's crisis, there's contention. And the first thing I always have to find out before I can implement any program, offer any assistance is, number one, how was the trust breached, and is it repairable? Because if I'm looking for a relationship, meaning that I want to share, I want to become vulnerable, I want to become transparent, I want to look at this situation and say it's not a win-lose, it's not a lose-lose, it's not even a compromise. I want the win-win, the higher third alternative, something that's never been thought of, never been created before, but it's the best, highest value that we can produce for a community. I have to figure out how to create a relationship. And so even if I can figure out how the trust was breached, but I can't repair it, at best I will have an arrangement. I'll tolerate you. I'll walk past you and I'll give you a thin veneer smile, good morning, but I'll never give you my best. So our goal in doing this type of work is to not necessarily be comfortable. It is to challenge. It is to challenge. It is a challenge ideology that's contrary to that principle that everyone is afforded human dignity and respect. It is where we sit in times of discomfort, not in comfort. It is swimming against the stream. So I would just like to say that the work that you're doing, the challenge that is set before you, the foundation that's being laid, is the most critical work beyond any technology that we can develop, beyond any amount of economics that we can amass. Because if we cannot learn, if we cannot challenge ourselves to revisit and redefine what the humanity is, we will no longer have it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to share with my colleagues the rising concern about the role of stereotyping and profiling that plays in society today and affects us. We have to understand that we're trying to treat the root cause of a bigger problem. If we can address stereotyping and profiling, then we are less likely to have upheavals in society, because stereotyping and profiling is the pre-step towards hate. People who have fear of certain groups because of the stereotypes they know about, those groups. They tend to hate them, fear them, and if they do that, they go act violently against those groups. And I'll give you examples in a moment. So we as a society, in order to avoid violence, avoid backlash, we need to address the root cause of it, and that is stereotyping. And as my colleagues have mentioned, that it's a human phenomenon, that we use it as a shortcut when we don't have enough information about someone or something. We revert back to stereotypes. We think we see a snake, we don't know if it is, poisonous or not. We have, phobia from snakes, that they are, poisonous, deadly. So our reaction immediately, we are against snakes, spiders, and people of certain religions or races or colors. So that's a human tendency to shortcut the process. I don't have enough time to know if this snake is poisonous or not. I'm not going to take the risk. I'm not going to go take a course in college to find out. I need to make a decision right now, so I'm going to stereotype, it's a snake, it's poisonous. And that's what happens to a lot of people today. When they decide they're going to purchase a gun, how they're going to use a gun, okay, that if a certain person of a certain profile walks into their house or knocks on the door, they may discharge that gun because they think, oh, he must be a thief, okay? So we have to understand the importance of this cycle and try to address it. Now, we have heard statements like, Mexicans are criminals, rapists, and drug dealers. We have heard Italians are part of the mafia. Muslims are terrorists. Syrian refugees are ISIS. These kinds of generalities and stereotyping really is out there. We hear it all the time. And as my colleague said, there's probably some example where it is true. You can find a Mexican who has done that, or a Muslim who was a terrorist, or a Syrian refugee who committed, a crime. But that's not the norm. 99.9% of those people are not so. Now, there's a difference between what an individual like you and me has of a bias towards people they don't know, and institutional bias that's promoted by groups. For example, there are some specific groups in this country that has got funding to promote Islamophobia in society by various means. They received over $206 million, and the main purpose of their existence is to fabricate stuff and promote Islamophobia on social media, on television, and get the American public opinion to have that idea that Muslims equal terrorists. We don't want Muslims in the United States. And that's where someone like presidential candidate Donald Trump can come and say, a total shutdown of Muslims coming to the United States. The role of the media as institutions in promoting stereotypes. For example, when the media consistently across the board uses the phrase Islamic terrorist or Muslim terrorist, and first it's an error to say so because the word Islamic means peaceful, and a terrorist is not peaceful. But whenever the person who commits a crime has a Muslim name or has a Muslim connection whatsoever, then religion is brought into the picture compared to other people of other faith, where the religion is not mentioned. For example, last week, a white man killed 2 white police officers. If that person was black and he shot 2 police officers, we will be thinking about it in the stereotype that's in the media that African Americans are against law enforcement. But the man was himself white. So the media really uses this tool in order to simplify things because they don't want to go into details, and they use these headlines that really promotes more stereotyping. Institutions like political institutions and candidates, when they say, oh, we don't want to be politically correct, that's really a guise for bigotry. They want to legitimize bigotry, discrimination, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and so on and so forth. Now, what we need to do to address this is multifold. First is education. And we are in an institution of higher learning. For us to put aside our stereotypes and our profiling and biases and learn more about other people, other cultures, other religions, to see how similar we are across the world, because we are all involved in it. Sometimes our leaders, speaking about people of other nations, they also use the same tool. Through education, we learn more about the world, about ourselves, about our history, so we will see that there's so much more in common than we think. Second is strong enforcement of laws, anti-discrimination laws. Justice Department is the leader on this, to make sure that in a free nation, we don't have people using, especially law enforcement officers, using the law against the people. So investigations and prosecution by the Justice Department are important to uphold the laws that for people to be equal. Communication. All of us need to speak up. Speak up through our individual capacities, through social media. When somebody is hiding, it's easier through social media to stereotype people, to say horrible things that people can't say it in your face. We need all to speak up by defriending that person or unliking that comment. Now the social media is so terrible. You go on Twitter and you really don't want to read the comments because it's awful. Good people, most people are good, and they need to speak up, and especially to their friends or relatives who are putting that stuff out there. We need to reach to the crowd out there. Here, there are the good crowd. There are people out there by the thousands who are rallying for things that are politically incorrect, and they are bigoted. And we need to reach to our own communities. And I don't want to say just the majority are the ones who are having those biases. We all do. We're all part of the same culture, and we all watch the same kind of shows, and we develop the same kind of biases. We have to befriend people from other cultures and faith in order to learn more about others and to disengage with this stereotyping. As Pastor Coffin said, the next good Emily erased, some of the bad examples of Emily. The more good Emilys he saw, the more he was able to change that. If you befriend a Jew, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Sikh, you know, a person of a different race or color, and you get to know them as really as a friend, then you will not have those biases towards other people. The fourth part is in voting. Not just voting on elections like tomorrow, which I hear, I don't know if it is a true stereotype that college students don't vote. I think shouldn't be true. I voted as a college student, and I knew most of my friends did too. How many of you voted? How many of you planning to vote tomorrow? Yeah, what about the rest? Well, you need to vote. This is one of the most powerful ways of really putting your opinion out there. But voting with your dollars, where you buy your stuff. If there is a business that, like how these shoppers came out of the store, once they saw what they saw, they just walked out and said, I'm not going to participate or buy from this, give business to this company. You could do the same. We do a lot of shopping online. We need to make sure that the people hear us through our dollars. And by media watching, choosing which media to watch. Sometimes we like to watch the media that suits us. And we know that they are being biased. They are being, participating in that same problem. But yet we continue to watch them. So we are, in a way, guilty with them. We need to break that and learn the other point of view of other organizations. So there's a lot we can do together and individually to address this issue and to make our society better and to break the cycle. But we have to consider it an urgent issue in order to do something about it. Thank you.
So help me thank all the speakers for their insight. So we have a few last minutes for just a few questions. The first question I have, and anyone here who has a question, just make sure to raise your hand if you don't have an index card. Louis on the side and other ushers will help you. If you do have one, just make sure you raise it and they'll pick it up for us to read. The first question is, I hear the concept of institutional racism. What are your thoughts about this? What is it and how does it operate? This is for anyone on the panel.
I like the way you handed it over to me. Yeah. Well, this is a good question. I was actually doing a class with a group the other day, and the gentleman was, he was a white male. He was 31 years old, he told me, 37 years old, I think. And basically was saying that I don't understand, I was trying to teach on how to build trust and legitimacy. And he did not understand. He said the things that we're talking about, he said, this should be, if we could just replace this one element in his institute, in his example was just a father, put a father in the home, this would be all go away in 20 years. And he was speaking specifically to conflict in the African American community. And I had to carefully try to, in a very short amount of time, try to walk him back through the impact of what I call the African Holocaust. And what I told him, I said, if you look back in the last 20 years, if you look back in the last 200 years, and how many of you have seen the movie 13th, the documentary? Has anybody seen that? Check it out. It's a very good documentary. It's a nonpartisan documentary. And it's talking about the 13th Amendment that basically says that no one should be held in involuntary servitude except through crime or punishment. And what I was walking them back through is to show them how did the whole situation to where we are now as far as crime and punishment is concerned. In my jurisdiction, I have the largest incarceration facility in the country. It's called Coleman, and we have the Bureau of Prison houses about over 6,000 annually. From our office, we contribute about 12 to 1,300 as far as document in that. But there's clearly overrepresentation across the board as far as people of color and poor people in the prison system. And what I was trying to show him is in walking him back, if you go back to the 90s, and you look at the Omni-Crime Bill, when we were going after crack cocaine as far as a law enforcement perspective, and everybody was cheering because they wanted to get drug dealers off the street, and they had the 3 strikes law, 3 strikes and you're out, the impact that it had. If you take it further back to that, you start taking back to the slavery, when families were not allowed to marry. We could take families, fathers from families. You could do different things at different times. Even the laws that were impugned at that time with regard to the South, and there's a very different creation as far as law enforcement in the North as far as the South. The North is based on the Robert Peel, the Metropolitan London Police in 1829. That model with Boston Police and New York followed thereafter. The law enforcement agencies in the South were created very, very differently. They were 1/3 of the budgets were dedicated for slave patrols. And so immediately after the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment was passed, you have to understand that the slavery of the slaves that ended up here in the United States, even through the South America and Central America, probably 2/3 of the economy of Europe was impacted when the slave trade was abolished. And so particularly in the States and particularly in the South, what happened is immediately they had to figure out a way how to subsidize the economy that was lost because of that abolition. And one of the things that was done is what we call debtor's prison. So if I don't have a job, I'm going to release you. I'm going to release you, and but you can't 2 or 3 people, more than 2 people can't gather. That's considered loitering, so that's a citable, it's a ticketable offense. Search and seizure, right? And so you end up getting put back into institutional servitude to pay off debts or to be able to support the economy. This is what we found, that the Justice Department found in Ferguson, as a matter of fact, in Ferguson, Missouri, after the Michael Brown investigation. It was that there was a systemic mechanism in place for years that overfined, oversighted, particularly people of color, more specifically African Americans. And so, for instance, if I had a fine that you fine me for $300, and I say, well, I got $150, I can pay $150. Well, if you don't pay the full $300, I'm going to issue a warrant for your arrest, so people start to become fugitives. So once you get into the system, it's more difficult to get out, particularly if you're a person of color and particularly if you're a poor person. And those policies are based on the groupings that we're talking about here. Because at the very, very premise, it has a value system placed on you based on which group you belong to. So the wealth that is generated based off of that is transferred from generation to generation. And the negative impact, the pathology that impacts that, the feelings, the emotions, the economic status are impacted through institutions. So you're talking about prejudice plus power. You can call me every name in the book that you want to. It may be offensive, but if you don't have the ability to impact my education, my economics, my law, my politics, my war, my health, it means nothing. It means nothing. Because groups have organized around those insults, and still if they have a sense of cultural identity, a sense of an economic base, a collective economic base, and a collective purpose, they can move past that. It may be offensive, but it will have nominal impact. Because eventually, I'll move into a system where I can control the economics, I can control the politics, I can control the criminal justice system, and it'll just be insults, it'll just be talk. So when we start talking about institutionalized racism, it has a deeper impact because it transfers past, it's intergenerational. And so what we're dealing with now is, and I say this to students all the time, is that the reason we can't deal the Arab-Muslim immigration problem, the reason we can't deal the Latino immigration problem is because in this country we never dealt with the Native American issue. push it to the side, sweep it under the rug. Never dealt with the African American issue, push it on the side, sweep it under the rug. Because people really don't understand the impact that those incidents, coordinated incidents, had over time. And so we're paying for that now because nobody wants to deal with it.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time because some of my students have to go to class. But Imam Musri, if you have, I know it's hard, but a few seconds, go ahead, comment. Yeah, if you had something to say for it.
Well, I want to agree with William on this. The example we have before us right now, we are a day away from the elections. And in the country, there is 6.1 million people who cannot vote, even though they are American citizens, because they had felonies. Now, that's understandable. 1.7 million of those 6 million across the country are here in Florida. So we have 27% of all these cases right here in this state. These people cannot vote. Even though these people have already served their time and they are back in society, but their rights are not restored, because to get them restored, the governor has to okay them, okay? Now, during, and to understand this, as William just said, 21% of the African American community in the state has that, cannot vote because of that. Wrap your head around the numbers here. Now, so on election day, you have people who are Americans who have served their time. They are not able to vote because the law allows the governor to wait on it. The previous governor, Charlie Crist, during his 4-year term, he restored 155,000 plus rights to vote to individuals. Governor Scott, in his 5 years now, he has restored only 2,300 plus. So it's up to that individual to say yes, or a little small commission that he has to review those cases. So when an officer arrests an African American and they're charged with a felony, okay, because of stereotyping and bias, that begins the process of this person, as a father or a mother, not being able to find a job because they have now a record. They're not able to vote and be represented. They are, they are denied many other services, getting a loan from the bank to buy a house or start a business, on and on and on. So you see that a stop. And I say it because one time I was at a gas station, and this highway trooper, he's a tall white trooper, and he saw an African American driving a nice car. And he said, he's making a comment. He said, I bet that he has this not his car. And I'm going to stop him on the highway and check him out, okay? And he said, most of the time I have no reason to stop him. I just stop him and say, your tag or your brake light or something. And then I'm going to find something on him, which is not what most of us go through. So if you start the process with profiling and stereotyping a person and you end up arresting them, giving them a felony, now you derailed their life and their family, and then you have what he started with, where's the father? Not at home. Well, who put the father behind bars? It's our stereotyping and hate.
All right, thank you. So help me thank all the speakers for their time and insight. So because we're running out of time, I just want to make sure everybody knows there's free food outside for all those who attended. We want to thank you for coming. And I want to thank all my students for their effort. Please give them a round of applause for their effort throughout the semester. And I also want you to be aware of the logo they came up with that's on the screen that represents the mosaic of diversity that exists in the human race, as well as the identity from different backgrounds, religious, political, and ethnic. And I know we had a raffle outside, so make sure to pick up a raffle ticket, and we'll do the drawing outside by the food. Thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.